Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dee Dee Petri, President and CEO of the Olmsted Network. Our network includes hundreds of Olmsted parks and landscapes, scholars, conservancies, urban planners, and more, all coming together to protect and preserve Olmsted landscapes. If you would like to learn about becoming a network partner, please go to our website for more information. On July 15, the Olmsted Network was delighted to debut our brand new website, olmsted.org. I invite you to visit this website, which combines the rich content of our old website and the easy access, look and feel of the Olmsted 200 website. Here you can find our national calendar, as well as our blog, Shared Spaces, which is updated with new and exciting stories every week. You'll find history, information about designs, easy access to the Olmsted papers, and a look at our advocacy in support of Olmsted Parks and Places. In the blog Shared Spaces, don't miss a wonderful new personal story from Olmsted family member and practicing landscape architect, Susan Olmsted, who recounts how she and others helped renew the Mariposa Big Tree Grove over 100 years after Olmsted Sr. helped to protect it. And take a look at another brand new feature with particular bearing on today's program, our Olmsted Network Partner Directory. There are hundreds of groups around the country that steward Olmsted parks and landscapes. We are the first and only organization that brings these groups together to share best practices, compare notes, and support their invaluable efforts. We want the broader world to know about them and to support them too. I suspect the most famous conservancy is Central Park Conservancy, founded in 1980, when Central Park was on very hard times. Crime, lack of funding, inadequate maintenance, and lack of appreciation threatened this great park. Under the leadership of Betsy Barlow Rogers, Central Park Conservancy helped to turn the park around, and its groundbreaking success prompted the development of friends groups and conservancies across the country, which the Olmsted Network has been helping ever since. I invite you to visit the directory and to learn more about important stewards across the country. If you go to these pages, you can see the lands they steward, enjoy extraordinary photographs, and also link directly to their own website. Today, you will hear from 3 of them. Over the next hour, we will travel to 3 different communities, Newburgh, New York, Lake Wales, Florida, and Seattle, Washington, to see what Olmsted stewards are doing, how they are doing it, and how public-private partnerships are creating vibrant and thriving parks and communities. This is the 3rd of our quarterly conversations with Olmsted. Our final program of the year will be on October 24 on free speech and Olmsted Parks. You can watch all 15 of our programs by visiting Conversations with Olmsted on our new website, where we have posted them all. I also urge you to sign up now for our national conference, the Olmsteds in Wisconsin. This will be an opportunity to learn more about extraordinary efforts underway in Milwaukee and Lake Geneva to steward great Olmsted landscapes. We have an array of great speakers, including Roy Diblick, the horticulturalist behind Lurie Garden in Chicago, and Jens Jensen, the great-great-grandson of, yes, Jens Jensen. In so many ways, this conference will continue the conversation we will start today. As you will find out in city after city, Olmsted Parks and Places are serving as keys to renewal. Today, we'll learn how ambitious groups are investing in the revitalization of our historic parks and places for future generations. To lead us in this timely conversation is Melina Walling, National Climate and Agriculture Journalist for Associated Press, based in Chicago. Melina confesses that her first exposure to Olmsted may have been in high school when she wrote a term paper in part focused on the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Olmsted must have cast his spell on her, since she's been following him ever since, graduating from Stanford University and Olmsted Design Campus with a BA and an MA, and then returning to the Windy City. We are delighted she can be with us today, and we hope you'll take a look at some of her more recent stories in the chat box. Joining Melina is Julia Raskin, board member of the Downing Park Conservancy. Downing Park is the last great work of Olmsted, Calvert Vaux, and their sons. And I can testify this park overlooking the Hudson is a very special place. Thanks to the leadership of the Conservancy and other community groups, including the Garden Club of Orange and Dutchess Counties, Newburgh Urban Farm and Food Initiative, and local schools, the park is proving a vibrant center for community activity. Julia received her BS from Oberlin and dual master's degrees in urban planning and environmental policy from the University of Michigan. Joining Julia is urban planner and adjunct professor Victor Dover. Victor, an Olmsted Network member, Lake Wales Heritage, and others are advancing an ambitious city planning initiative known as Lake Wales Envisioned to realize a city in a garden as planned by Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. over 100 years ago. Lake Wales Envisioned looks to a future without conventional sprawl, disconnected streets, and front-facing garages. Instead, residents will have walkable communities with tree-lined streets in keeping with the original Olmsted vision. I know we will look forward to learning more. And from the West Coast is environmental historian Jennifer Ott, who chairs the Volunteer Park Trust in Seattle. Jennifer is also the author of a wonderful book, Olmsted in Seattle, Creating a Park System for a Modern City. I highly recommend it, as well as her presentation on Seattle parks back in 2021. Volunteer Park and the greater Seattle Olmsted Park community are undertaking some amazing initiatives to ensure inclusive, accessible, and healthy parks in Seattle, and we'll learn more about steps there today. Please let us know where you are from in the chat box, but submit any questions you have through the Q&A box. We will answer as many audience questions as possible at the end and plan to conclude in 1 hour. With that, I'm pleased to pass the baton to Melina to start this conversation. Thank you and welcome to Conversations with Olmsted.
Thank you. And thanks so much for that great introduction. I'm excited to talk to everyone today. So maybe to start with, we could just pass it to Julia. So can you start by giving us a little history of Downing Park? Where is it located? What's the Olmsted connection? And why is it special?
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Raskin. I'm the president of the Downing Park Conservancy. Downing Park, as people have said, is located in the heart of Newburgh. Newburgh is a city located on the banks of the Hudson River in New York. The park is named after Newburgh's Andrew Jackson Downing. He was an eminent horticulturalist and a pioneer of the public park movement. He ran an architectural firm with Calvert Vaux in the 1850s. And after he passed, the city of Newburgh wanted to create a park in his memory and commissioned Olmsted and Vaux to design it in 1889. And it was opened in 1897. And something that's really special about it is that it's the last collaborative effort by Olmsted and Vaux. I know, Dee Dee, you mentioned that. Thank you. It's also the only project that included both of their sons. So that's another kind of fun fact about Downing Park. It's when I talk to people in Newburgh, I think I hear the most about Downing Park. People tell me about their memories of being kids and going up on the hill and seeing the incredible view of the Hudson. I think it's one of the most iconic views in Newburgh and in the Hudson Valley. You can see Storm King and Breakneck Ridge jutting down into the Hudson, which is actually the deepest point of the Hudson River. So it's a very, very special park.
Great. Thank you. All right. So next, I think we'll pass it to Victor. Can you do the same for us and give us a little history of Lake Wales?
Certainly. Contrary to popular belief, Florida is not actually flat. We have a central highland ridge, and the highest point on that ridge in the center of the state, tallest points in peninsular Florida. The Olmsted brothers designed Mountain Lake Estates and adjacent Bach Sanctuary for the late Edward Bach. Edward Bach was well known as the editor-in-chief of Ladies' Home Journal. Bach Sanctuary, which is now called Bach Tower Gardens, is one of the great Olmsted legacy landscapes. But it's not as well known that, and we'll go to the slides, that the Olmsted brothers were also asked by Edward Bach to design plans for the city of Lake Wales, immediately adjacent. And they did a lot of aspects of Lake Wales. I'm just going to see if I can forward us to my spot. There we go. There's a picture of a Bok Tower rising on the top of what we call Iron Mountain, at least a mountain by Florida standards. And so they designed streets, they designed neighborhood plans for extending the city, and street tree planting plans for Lake Wales. There were a lot of documents, dozens of documents left behind by the Olmsteds and their teammates at the time, including beautiful plans, but also a famous memo to the city commission of the city that devoted 4 pages to the importance of civic beauty and the appearance of the city. I think that's very, very telling. Now, Lake Wales is a great old Florida town, and in Olmsted's time, and in the time of their proteges, John Nolan and William Lyman Phillips, Florida was viewed as the great national laboratory for town and city building. And you can kind of see that on display throughout the city. And we did a downtown revitalization plan for Lake Wales a few years ago called Lake Wales Connected. And that plan, among other things, revived or boosted the revival of the Olmsted Brothers plans, in particular for street tree planting. The idea that Lake Wales could be a city rising in a garden on the ridge. And so at the time, we were focused on the center of the town. But as it turns out, there's lots of action at the edge. And so our new phase, our new effort is called Lake Wales Envisioned. And this is trying to get a handle not just on the revitalization of the core of the city, but on limiting sprawl and managing the larger legacy landscape. That's the city's new plan to guide growth throughout the city and this big surrounding utility service area for decades to come. That's about 40,000 acres. And so while the Olmsteds didn't tell us what to do in that area, we know the kinds of questions that they would ask. A year ago, there was a little bit of a crisis of confidence in Lake Wales. They looked to nearby towns and saw the ooze of conventional Central Florida suburban sprawl, like an asphalt coating coming down their way. And they said, oh no, how bad can it get? And I think over the course of the last year, we sort of switched the question to over the coming decades, how good can it get if we get in control of it and design it like it should be? So looks like it's catching up there. Yeah. This spring, we held a major community symposium at Bok Tower Gardens and kickoff meetings and a week of charrette activities to design the new plan, and brought out hundreds of citizens to touch the plan. And all that work is summarized on the lakewalesenvision.com website. So you might be interested in taking a look at that. A few big ideas. The science shows and the Olmsted tradition of starting with the green parts for designing one city shows that Lake Wales is an opportunity to build or conserve 2 great green belts on the east and west of the town, and symbolized by the big green areas on this map. And there are lots of opportunities between the 2 great green belts to extend the neighborhood green network in the way that Olmsteds would have in the neighborhoods and greenways and parks. And so that's where Lake Wales Envisioned is all about. It's about starting with the green parts. We have a lot of gray parts to fix, including the old aging mall. What can we do with that? Perhaps turn it into a mixed-use village center, peel back some of the asphalt, make it go from gray to green. We have lots of these places that are already settled in the city where we have opportunity to accommodate growth, which there's a lot of pressure to do, and get better through the growing. Now, there are also possibilities of making it a lot worse. And one fear we have is that the snout houses, the garage doors, or the subdivisions with the development backing up to the through-going roads will take hold instead. And so Lake Wales Envision is trying very hard to get out in front of that. It's a big picture plan. So as we zoom in on it, we've been sort of recreating the textbook on the Lake Wales way to grow. Mixed housing types, starting with the green parts. Public space comes first, and mixed use. There are also plans for how to allow for a limited development in the surrounding countryside in conservation village format. And we've also thought about what to do about those existing street corridors where there's a lot more gray and that needed, and how we might green those up and make the place better for having lived in it. That's the story of Lake Wales Envision. More at lakewalesenvision.com. Now, I think up next is Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Victor. And yeah, Jennifer, last but not least, do you want to tell us about Volunteer Park?
Great, thank you. I love so many things that you just said, Victor. This is gonna be a great discussion. So I'm Jennifer Ott. I'm the chair of the Volunteer Park Trust, and we are in Seattle. Our park is located at the top of the hill in Seattle, well, one of the hills on Capitol Hill. It's one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the city, and it's the only really large open space park in the neighborhood. And this is the great view across. We have a reservoir for the city water system, and it looks out to the Space Needle, which you can just see in the distance there, out to the to Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. So we have a spectacular location in the park. And oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. I'm sorry, getting the hang of this. So our Olmsted connection is that we go back to 1903 when John Olmsted came to Seattle to design a park system. One of the first places he went was what was then called City Park. Park was a very generous word for it. It was basically a group or a space of land owned by the city with some sort of odd landscaping. And luckily, Olmsted included it as one of the anchor parks in his park and boulevard system. And so he came in 1904 and designed this plan that you see here for the park, and then returned in 1910 when there was more funding to actually implement the park plan, and did a little bit of rejiggering. And we got a spectacular park. It's one of the most implemented of the Olmsted designs for Seattle. And one of the more interesting, so for each of the large parks in Seattle, he gave each its own character. For Volunteer Park, it is the more formal of the parks, particularly along the center ridge line. It's very symmetrical and planned out in very careful detail. The flanks of the park that sort of go down the hill are more informal and pastoral. We have great lawns and beautiful spaces for walking amongst the groves of trees. And so now we have this park. This is looking alongside that reservoir down one of the pathways. We have gorgeous mature trees, lots of nice Olmstedian winding pathways. And it's just it's exactly what Olmsted envisioned. It's a respite within the city, an oasis of green and quiet and fresh air and beautiful views around the city. And so what the trust does to activate the park and to tend to it is that we sort of have layers of activities. One is that we have regular work parties, the second Saturday group, which is a very dedicated cadre of volunteers. But then we also have twice yearly stewardship events. And these are really key to keeping the park in shape. It's 43 acres, and there is generally 1.5 gardeners assigned to the park, which is an awful lot to ask of 1.5 gardeners. And so we supplement their work by doing the things that volunteers can't muck up. We do lots of spreading mulch and weeding and edging of lawns and that sort of thing, so that the staff can spend their time on the more skilled and precise tasks that need to be done in the park. We also, I just had to point out one of my favorite work parties we did a special project in honor of one of our co-founders, Doug Bailey. We planted 25,000 daffodils on the slopes of the west side of the park, because a lot of the park that was not realized according to the Olmsted plan has essentially become trees, which are great, lovely, very nice to have, but none of the understory is in place. And so you really don't get that sense that Olmsted intended for this park. And we just thought that the best way to fill this enormous area was to put daffodils. And so we did They bloomed. We're in our second spring now, and they're going gangbusters. And it's just a community. Already, it's become an iconic part of the park, and people just love it. And so we're going to hopefully expand that, because there is an entire berm along the west side of the reservoir that is basically becomes blackberries if it's not tended to. And there's nothing like the daffodils are coming to hasten the cutting back of the blackberries. And so another thing that we do are activities in the park, events. We do this primarily because it is, although it is a well-used park, it really in the past has suffered from not having enough organized activities in it, because particularly the museum that is in the park is not always open. And so we've done the holiday in the park, we've done the Halloween pet parade. We have a lot of fun at these events. And then a couple of years ago, we raised the funds to redevelop the amphitheater in the park, which involved demolishing the old structure that was not functioning very well and was basically a graffiti magnet, and replacing it with this structure that you can see off in the distance. We worked very hard to keep it in keeping with the Olmsted vision for the Great Lawn, but also providing some really essential services, both for performances and for the park. And so we do a summer series each summer. There are 6 concerts. We're right in the middle of them now, and it's been great fun. We also do a whole bunch of special projects, and we'll be talking about this more in the discussion, but just to give you a sense, these are the types of things that need to be done in the park, both from a fundraising perspective, but also from just a shepherding the project through to completion sort of a perspective, neither of which the Parks Department is able to do. And so we have taken on that role for some of these smaller projects. And so looking forward to the future for Volunteer Park is climate change. That's our big challenge that's coming. We have a faulty and nearly non-existent irrigation system. And for a rainy city, it seems odd that that's such a concern, but our hot summers are only getting hotter. Although today I'm wearing a sweater because it's not warm at all here today. And then also looking at how can we work with the Parks Department effectively and equitably with the rest of the city. That is on our horizon. So I will pass it back to Julia, who's going to do her slides.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And Julia, I'll also ask kind of the first question of you, which is that you're heading a brand new conservancy. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all. What is the mission of the conservancy and how you interact with the city? And then, yeah, if you want to circle back to the slides too, that would be great.
Absolutely. I am circling back to the slides now. Thank you for the question. And sorry for that little technical glitch. You guys got the appetizer. Now you're going to get the full meal all about Downing Park. So as Melina mentioned, Downing Park has actually had a committee for a very long time, since 1985. They were called the Downing Park Planning Committee, and we recently rebranded actually to be the Downing Park Conservancy. This is our board. We're going to be having a whole rebranding actually really soon, so keep your eyes peeled for our new logo and our whole new look. It's very exciting. Our mission is to advocate for the preservation of Downing Park, to assist the city in maintaining the park, and to activate the park by sponsoring and supporting community-based programming and events. We've ramped up our fundraising in the last couple of years. We've raised actually more than $30,000 just over 2 years, and that's almost been entirely through individual donations. So when we talk about stewardship and local appreciation of a park, I think that really goes to show how much people in Newburgh and in the region really love and cherish Downing Park. A little bit of that money actually did come from a small grant, and that was through the Garden Conservancy Gardens for Good grant. It was a small grant, and we got a bunch of electric tools to do a lot of the ground maintenance, much like Jennifer, you were describing for your park as well. We do something very similar. We also installed 5 new benches and are using them for fundraising through dedications of the benches. So we've also used a lot of this funding to make sure that the park is being activated. I think this is one of the things that people have seen over the years. Newburgh is has limited resources. The city of Newburgh has limited resources and used to have actually a line item in the budget just for the park, but no longer does. Now the city really only mows the lawn and takes the garbage out. So the conservancy is really responsible for a lot of the maintenance of the park. But just as important, I think, as maintenance is also activating the park and making sure that people feel really excited to be there. So we've had some great programming. We've partnered with Chapman Steamer Arts. They're a local arts organization that has put together a bunch of different programs for the park, including, as you can see here in these pictures, drawing outside. I think it's called plein air drawing. And then we also had a jazz band play in the shelter house, and we've had some open mic nights. It's really fun. Some things coming up. We have a salsa day in the park on September 16th. We'll be hosting a folk show on September 30th. And also similar to the Seattle park, Jennifer, the city park, we also have second Saturday cleanup, so we chose the same day. They're critical to making sure that the park looks nice and that people feel really good there. We also have some BOCES summer youth employment program. BOCES is part of the SUNY program here, and the state has a youth employment program where they have kids come out and actually do a lot of the groundwork for us, and it's a really incredible resource. And it's also just great to see these kids out in the park and like enjoying themselves doing this type of work. So we're very fortunate to have all of those partners, and we have even more. I know, Dee Dee, you mentioned some of our partners. We have the Garden Club of Dutchess in Orange County they've been an incredible partner and have brought so many resources into the park. They received a $10,000 restoration initiative grant from the Garden Club of America to restore parts of the park and a lot of tree damage that was done in a tornado that went through the area in 2018. And then that was followed up with even more funding from the Garden Club of America to create the Root for Trees program, which actually uses Downing Park as a kind of outdoor classroom to teach local students from 2 different schools, local schools, all about trees and their local environment through tree plantings and other hands-on lessons. And it's a really incredible program. Another partner that we have is the Greater Newburgh Parks Conservancy. They're a long-standing partner, and I really wanted to call them out today because of all those great trees that are planted through the Root for Trees program. They need to be watered. And so the Greater Newburgh Parks Conservancy has been helping us water the trees they have a watering truck, and we don't have one. So it's a really great local partner, kind of a way for us to work together. And then last but not least, the Downing Park Urban Farm is a really important community asset and touchstone for people visiting the grounds of the park. They share our commitment to environmental justice and education in the city of Newburgh, and we partner to improve public health through access to nature, and for them it's specifically access to fresh food. And they also, we partner on a lot of different types of events as well. So thank you, and sorry again for that technical glitch, but yes, if anyone has any other questions. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think you brought up some really great points, and I think all of you touched on this in one way or another. So I'm going to ask one of the questions that is for all of you, and I guess you guys can fight over who gets to answer it first. But so we all know that maintenance is really essential to these green spaces, but maybe it's less attractive to donors or sponsors, or lower on the list for municipal budgets. So can you all just explain why maintenance and stewardship is so important? And I think y'all touched on that like a little bit, but I don't know if I should call on one of you or if someone feels a burning urge to answer, but yeah, go for it. Jennifer, yeah.
I'll jump in there. It's so true that is not the topic that jumps out from a grant application, just maintenance, but it's so important because I see a couple reasons. One is that it shows, if you have a well-maintained park, it shows that it's cared for, and it discourages a lot of the damage that sometimes can get done in parks. And then it also amplifies the investment. We've invested in these landscapes. We've tended to them for over a century. And so we need to keep tending to them so that we can then pass them forward to the next generation. And then the third thing that we're particularly cognizant of in Volunteer Park is that being a fully implemented and mostly intact Olmsted design, we don't want it to die by the death of 1,000 cuts, that you just slowly through attrition lose elements of the park design. And so all those reasons, it's just essential to keep up on that day-to-day edging the lawns kind of work.
I'll add a little bit. In fact, one of the contributions from the Olmsted Network leadership to Lake Wales Envisioned was on this exact topic. Great Lucy Lawless, the first thing she said when she saw the renderings and the maps and things is that make sure this is maintainable, because I think she was getting at the same thing you are, Melina, which is that we don't want to just enjoy these landscapes when they're installed. We want to enjoy them for hundreds of years so they can do what they were intended to do, which is promote well-being. Now, the little town of Lake Wales, with its limited means, manages to maintain significant park system that was left behind by the founders and the planners thereafter. But they're supported by Olmsted Conservancy, a small nonprofit group called Lake Wales Heritage, who does tree plantings. And they have set the town on fire with enthusiasm for Olmsted, which I think is part of it. We have to make places people really love, and then they'll be willing to invest in them. I'm sitting today in the city of Coral Gables, which wasn't designed by the Olmsted brothers, but by their competitors. And in the city of Coral Gables, you can notice it in a satellite photograph because it's like a green rectangle surrounded by the grayer areas of all the places around it that lack the same tree canopy. And somehow the city of Coral Gables manages to maintain 3 full-time urban forestry crews that roam around the city, trimming and planting trees, and plant thousands of trees a year to replace those that are lost to storms or disease or age. And people wonder, well, how can they do that? And at the same time have the lowest millage rate, the lowest property tax rate in the region. And the answer is because the street trees themselves and the parks and the wonderful public realm are adding so much value to the real estate that the city has more options. They're not constantly faced with cutting services to try and balance the budget. And I think, so we need for the maintainers of these legacy landscapes to think a little bit like real estate developers and say, how can we install things that will have such lasting value, either because people love them or they're willing to invest in them, that we don't even notice the costs of the maintenance because it seems unthinkable to do otherwise.
Thank you. Julia, did you have anything to add on that point, or?
No, I agree with what everyone said. I've definitely been in that situation of, asking for money for maintenance, and people, their face doesn't always look as excited as if you said, we're going to bring a big concert to the park or something. But when you actually really explain to people a lot of the things that Victor and Jennifer just said, that people understand it. I think it is about messaging and making sure that we really have our message on point, that maintenance is not just about maybe a park looking nice. There's all of these kind of externalities, positive externalities that happen with a well-kept landscape. And I think especially homeowners, if they understand that, it can really change the way people think about public space and parks.
Great, thank you. I think that's a perfect segue to ask how you get the community involved in caring for these landscapes and how you communicate with the public about exactly that, getting them to care for the landscapes.
Well, I guess I can start. There's, something that I think is really essential to good stewardship is actually inclusivity. I think we all share the point of view that public space is one of the most democratic resources that we have. And it's incredibly important that everyone be able to see themselves in their park, and really see that they have a space there, so that it's not just about stewarding someone else in the city's park. It's about stewarding your park, our park. And I think it really instilling that in people, and especially in cities where people might not have big backyards, like this is their backyard, right? And I think the more we create those spaces, whether it's through messaging, whether it's through like culturally appropriate programming that makes people really feel like they have a place in that park, then they will want to take care of it more. And I think that that's one of the biggest ways, especially in Newburgh, which is an incredibly diverse city. There really is no other way, I think, to get people to really show up for it if we are not meeting them part of the way and showing that that Downing Park is for everyone.
I would second what Julia said, is that one of the messages that we've gotten out is that it's a citywide park. It is in Volunteer Park, that sort of chicken and egg, that the most well-developed Olmsted parks tend to be in the wealthier neighborhoods. In Volunteer Park's case, that was partially intensive, but partially sort of the evolution of the city. The property values are higher near a well-developed park like this. And so we have been working very, very hard at getting the messaging out that this is a city park. And we've been trying to look at some of the unspoken issues that perhaps are barriers. One is that we had a monument to the volunteers in the wars of 1898 that was, the park is named for them. That's what Volunteer Park is named for. And it was both historically inaccurate and incredibly racially and ethnically offensive, just in that quiet, understated way that monuments can be. And so we gathered a community group together from all across the city and from all different communities to work to get the plaque removed. We're still in the process of getting the plaque replaced because we really want to document that story and talk about the context of the park. And so we see that as a way to really acknowledge the unspoken barriers in city parks that are in Seattle. We don't have a history of legal segregation, but we certainly have de facto segregation in our city. And so we've looked at that for our messaging as a way to really actively reach out to people. We've also, our summer series, we have turned into an opportunity. Basically, we love the music, but the real reason we do it is for the marketing. We distribute posters all throughout the city, and we're trying desperately to use technology to gather zip codes from our attendees this year. We're learning as we go, but we really want to show the city that it's a city park. And that backyard idea, it's in this dense neighborhood, people of all incomes. This is their chance to dig in the dirt if they come and work at one of our work parties. And this is their chance to sit on a nice lawn. And so it needs to be irrigated and kept soft and not crunchy brown. And so all of those things, we're trying to get the word across to people that it's a community-wide asset.
I want to second the motion for in-person, hands-on activity. You know, I'm working on planning for future landscapes primarily. The existing legacy landscapes are well in hand, but the surroundings are vulnerable. So that's a little more abstract for people. So it's a little hard to get people to understand why it's so important. So we've tried to build in-person community events that make people want to come out and participate in the planning hands-on. And we found that you have to go to people where they are. We try to stay out of City Hall as much as possible and instead go out into the neighborhoods, moving events around in different areas. In the northwest neighborhood of Lake Wales, which is the historic other side of the tracks, historically African-American community in the old segregated South, we found the most effective thing was walks in the neighborhood, led by the neighbors. And then their other neighbors would come out or stand out on their front porch and talk with the team. And those groups would grow as we would walk around. So those are an effective tool. On the other hand, we can't reach everybody in person that we'd like to reach. So with Lake Wales Envision, we're using video a lot, probably a lot more than we ever did in years past in city planning. And it's just because, you know, today, short attention spans and the visual nature of learning, it seems to help a lot. And so we built a kind of growing library of short video clips All the events are videotaped. And that's giving people that weren't there on the day of a chance to catch up really quick before they come to the next event.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to kind of go into this point a little bit more because I think all of you kind of touched on inclusivity and access. You know, can you talk a bit more about, obviously there are situations where not all communities have equal access to the benefits that these parks can provide. So can you talk a little bit more about how you're aiming to address that?
First.
I'll go first.
I can start calling on people as well.
In Seattle, we're just there's two-prong efforts at this. One is in process right now. Is we're working with the Seattle Parks Foundation, which is a nonprofit that is sort of an umbrella organization for 100 neighborhood park organizations. And we're looking at how can we use that organization as a meeting point to share our knowledge, share our connections, amplify each other's efforts, and really look at, because the park system, the Olmsted Park system, does extend mostly throughout the city. There are gap areas, but there's a lot of opportunity to amplify the impact of the Olmsted Parks that are available. That said, there are things about volunteer park that are very specific and only available in volunteer park. And so we want to ensure that it is as accessible as possible. And one idea that we floated, that's our second prong, that is just very much pie in the sky right now, but I hope we'll realize it, is some sort of shuttle. Something that would carry people to those anchor parks around the boulevard system in the city, so that it would be very easy to move between the parks without having to have a vehicle. Our transit system is a hub and spoke, so everything goes downtown and then heads back out, which is great for commuting, but not great for getting to parks across the city. And I had small children, used the bus a lot, and I would not have ventured out to West Seattle to go to the park. It's a long ways, and I would be a little hesitant to do that with small children. But if there was a shuttle so that I knew that it was going to make that circuit in whatever fashion that might turn out to be, I think that that could really make those parks with each of their individual characters more inclusive of the entire city, more available to them.
Lake Wales Connected and now Lake Wales Envisioned, we are anticipating the construction of some new parks, mostly small. Lake Wales itself is a small town, and everything that's built today is pretty close to everything else. So it's not a matter of distance, or proximity, but rather how you get there. So we're taking an approach that the City in the Garden Parks experience begins at your door. And so that's why the street tree planting and the sidewalk extensions, the greenways, the smaller components of the green network are so important to the plan, because those are our ways of getting people to the big spaces that are shared by all. And I think that's working, but we have a long way to go.
Thank you. Julia, did you have anything else to add, or? I know, sorry, you keep ending up last. I'm not trying to.
No, I don't mind. That's totally fine. I was first and then I missed my slides, so that's what happens. I mean, I think maybe Downing Park might be in a slightly kind of different situation where or location, geography, it's right in the heart of a city that is predominantly Black and Hispanic. And so it's quite easy to walk to Downing Park because Newburgh is not that big. So in terms of access, I would say Downing Park is actually quite accessible. So it kind of comes back, at least in physically accessible. But I think it kind of comes back to making the space inclusive and actually feel welcoming to people of all backgrounds. And that's where programming and messaging and those types of things really come in and are important. And also one other piece of that is making sure that it's also actually physically accessible for people of different abilities. That's something that we've been speaking to the city about a lot and are working hard to find the funds to actually repave all of the paths and make sure there's curb cuts where there should be curb cuts, so that everyone can enjoy the park.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, I want to ask, oh, sorry, Jennifer, you're going to say something. Go for it.
Could I just add to the ADA accessibility, because that is such an important one. We've been learning a ton, and once you look with that lens at a park, there are so many opportunities to improve them. We're putting in a new water fountain because once we always knew the water fountains were decrepit and horrifying, but then you look at it from an ADA lens and it's just appalling because it wasn't accessible in any way, shape, or form if you had mobility issues. And so we're moving it to a slightly different spot with much more accessibility, and anyone can use it. And it's such a small feature, but it's essential. You have to have access to cold water when you're in a park. And so it's, it's embarrassing because we didn't notice it before, but it's really exciting now because it's like, oh, these are all things we can do something about. And it's been very gratifying to find all the opportunities.
I think that's a great point. Thank you. Thank you for jumping in and stopping me to make it. I know we're coming up on the Q&A in a few minutes here. So before we get to that, I want to do one of my favorite things as a journalist, which is just to ask all of you if there's anything I haven't asked yet that you really wanted to speak to. And maybe I'll just call on each of you. So Julia, do you want to go first this time and we can go around?
Sure, I guess I would say come visit Downing Park. Come to Newburgh. The Hudson Valley is very beautiful. It's actually quite accessible from New York City. Whether you're driving, it's about an hour and a half from Manhattan, or you could take the Hudson line on the Metro North from Grand Central. It's one of the most beautiful train rides I've ever taken, really, especially if it's, just the fact that it's right outside my door. You're just on the Hudson the entire time. You can see bald eagles. It's beautiful. So it's definitely worth a visit, and we would love to have you. And I told you that we have some events coming up, so in September. So if you're curious, feel free to shoot me an email and I can send you more information.
Great, thank you. Victor, do you have anything else to add or anything you wanted to speak to?
Well, so city planning, my profession, in the modern sense, begins with public health and the parks movement. They were siloed apart from one another for many decades. But I also think that the modern projects like the one we're trying to do in Lake Wales are about bringing those things back together. So when we do that, you realize everything is connected to everything else. You can't leave transportation over there to be decided by the transportation people, and land use and zoning over there to be decided by someone else. You really kind of have to bring it all together. So what is the tie that binds the different things that you need, like the zoning or planning, the land use, the economic development, the transportation? Well, actually, the green parts are the parts that tie all this stuff together. And that is a lesson from the Olmsted legacy in city planning, not just in parks planning. It's all one thing.
Great, thank you. And Jennifer, last but not least, and then I'll hop into some specific questions for each of you.
Say that one of the things that thinking about the accessibility and also the maintenance is climate change. I mentioned that in my earlier presentation, is that we're very worried first about the old trees that are not irrigated because they never needed to be in Seattle. And our irrigation system in Volunteer Park is haphazard in most places. And so looking at a major investment, but that is completely worth it. Those trees are priceless. And so thinking about that, but then that radiates out is we're one park in a park system. And so we have to think about the Parks Department staffing, and we're volunteers and we're, excited to raise money and help implement, but we are not experts. We need the Parks Department staff expertise. And so then you get into the equity question, is there is only so much staff time, and so much of that needs to be spread around the city. And so we've been talking a lot about how can we find ways to collaborate with other parks in the city so that both or multiple parks benefit from the same effort, that sort of efficiency of scale. But that also takes some expertise, because it's not like it's easy to upgrade the irrigation systems and other things that we need for climate change. There is an exciting project, though. It's called Trees for Seattle, and the Friends for Seattle's Olmsted Parks, and then the Seattle Parks Foundation and the Parks Department are all invested in this project to replace trees, and not only replace them, raise the money to replace them, but also they're raising the money to maintain them, to water them for the 3 years that they need to get established, which will increase the survival rate tremendously. And so I'm very hopeful that that has pulled in a lot of expertise. And then once certain things are determined and settled, then it can be spread throughout the city. And I think that that's going to be a super effective way to increase the tree canopy in the city and really spread that benefit throughout the city.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to start asking a couple specific Q&A questions of each of you. So we'll start with one for Julia. This person's asking, are you seeing a change with the influx of New York City people moving up the Hudson Valley?
Yes, there's definitely people moving moving up further up the Hudson Valley. Technically, New York City is in the Hudson Valley, and I would say it's overall a lot of the people who are coming up here are very engaged in the community and want to, you know, see it thrive. There are you know, I see a lot of young people in the park, which is a really great thing. Lots of people walking their dogs, and young families. Overall, I mean, I know that people do have a lot of concerns about things like gentrification. Newburgh does happen to have a lot of affordable housing. You know, I would say more than many other cities does have tenant rights and, you know, a lot of these kind of systems in place that can actually stem the tide, which is great to see because we see the people who have made Newburgh so great actually be able to stay there. And there's a lot of home ownership in Newburgh as well, and that can really stem the tide as well. So it's really nice to actually see these two communities coming together. And we see them coming together in places like Downing Park.
Great, thank you. Okay, I have a specific question for Victor. So Florida is facing a lot of development pressures. I know there's a concern about old citrus groves being up for grabs, succumbing to deadly bacteria. And so I'm wondering if you can just explain a bit more about how your project is different from other developments in Florida, and also how Olmsted's principles inspire that project.
Well, there's some dots to connect here between this and your previous question for the others, because, and what Jennifer said about climate change, because a lot of those folks that are emptying out of New York City or Chicago that are headed up the Hudson to Newburgh are also headed down to Florida. And we have, you know, while it might have cooled a little bit after the Great Recession, we're now back to the point where 1,300 or 1,400 people a day are moving to the Sunshine State, and they can't all go on the coasts. And so some of them are coming to the center, to the Highland Ridge where Lake Wales occurs. And so all of a sudden, communities that were sleepy for decades are finding tremendous growth pressure. So what we learned from the Olmsted brothers in particular, in their practice in city planning, was that you have to design your way out of this problem. You can't just regulate it or solve it with policy pronouncements, or try to plan by the numbers. You have to design the system of the parks, the system of connected streets, the pattern of neighborhoods. And this is not the way it's been done in Florida for a long time. We've been, like in most of the Sun Belt, just receiving into City Hall across the counters plans by developers saying, here's what I want to build. And now you just react to it. And the cities, I think now, if they follow the Lake Wales example, they're going to want to get in front of it and lead the developers to settle on the neighborhood sites where they belong and not just anywhere, and not necessarily just on the cheapest land. We're also in a little bit of a race. There's billions have been spent in an attempt to solve for the citrus greening bacteria that you mentioned, which has devastated the Florida citrus industry. And there are new things they're trying, and we'll know in a year or two or three if it's going to work. with all the effort by the research universities and USDA and so on, we might be able to get the citrus industry back again to the point where the grove owners aren't forced to sell out for one last harvest at a price per acre that's not that much more than a year's income from the citrus grove that was there before. So it's a race. And what we hope to do is give them time for science to catch up with the citrus greening problem, because one of the citrus grove owners said to me that he had a bad dream, that the silhouette of an orange on the license plate of the state of Florida would be replaced by the silhouette of a ranch house with a garage door sticking out in the front of it. And I couldn't agree with him more. That is a bad dream. We don't want that to happen. Now, how does that connect to what Jennifer said about climate change? Well, at the coasts, on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast, we are having what used to be annual flooding is now monthly flooding. We skipped over seasonal flooding, and now it's a constant problem as the sea level rise is occurring. So people are beginning to think of themselves, even in wealthy coastal areas, as climate refugees. And they're going to be looking for places, they already are looking for places where they can go inland to safer ground, higher ground, and that's the Highland Ridge in the center of the state. For those who want to stay in Florida with its low income taxes and so on, the magnetism, not just for the New Yorkers coming down, but for the folks coming from the coast to the center of the state, is just going to amplify the pressure that I described. So we're trying to put a pattern on that and say the growth it will be in the form of real neighborhoods, mixed use neighborhoods, connected at meaningful centers, park systems, interconnected streets, mixed use and so on, not just subdivisions and shopping centers. That's the big difference.
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to jump off of that and ask Jennifer a question briefly that is kind of rolling around in my mind since your conversation about climate change. Do you think of climate change and stewardship as kind of intertwined at this point? And if so, can you explain that a little more?
I do. They're absolutely intertwined. Every generation has a challenge that they have to figure out. And I'm so grateful to the generations that preceded me that figured things out and passed on these parks to my community that I live in now. I don't live near the park. I live across the city, actually, but I definitely feel that it's our park. And so I feel like it's our job to figure out how are we going to help the park through whatever transition is right here on our horizon. It hasn't quite come into focus of what exactly we'll need to do, but it's definitely part of that bigger picture of how do we ensure that this park is viable and the investments in it are maintained in order to pass it on to the next generation.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we have time for one more question. And this is from Clinton Brown. He's asking, what are physical, social, and personal relationships across the edges of your parks, and how might stewardship cross the park border and vice versa? And I guess I'll start with maybe Victor, since he looks the most ready to answer.
Well, physical is in the question, and that's kind of where my head is most of the time. We say that the parks really need to be faced by the public faces of their neighboring buildings and homes. That the front doors of buildings, the front porch culture, is what makes the outer walls of the public room that the park is in. And then in Lake Wales, we have a little bit of an unusual opportunity. It's different from, say, Legacy Park in a northeast town where the park might be the rectangle or other shape that is left out of the city's fabric. Instead, the Olmsted brothers in Florida were experimenting with garden to city ideas that the whole city was a park, or the city was a garden, and we would design the green parts first. That still requires that you face the public spaces with the fronts of buildings, not the backs, not the loading docks, not the parking lots. And so putting eyes on the park in the same way that Jane Jacobs said we should put eyes on the street is a big part of getting those physical relationships right.
Thank you. Julia or Jennifer, do you have anything to add to that? Okay. I am not. Oh,
Could you do me a favor and can you say the question? It was kind of a little bit of like a complicated question. Can you say it again, actually?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, what are the physical, social, and personal relationships across the edges of your parks? How might stewardship cross the park border and vice versa? And also just want to flag that we're running a little short on time. So
Oh, okay.
quick
Yeah.
answer.
Well,
Thank
it's a
you.
good question, but if we're running out of time, thank you. That is fine.
Oh, did you want, okay, are we good?
No, we ran out of time, so I don't
Okay.
want to, I don't want to.
Okay, I will pass the baton away, but thank you all for your great answers and for doing this conversation. So yeah, I will pass the baton. Thank you, Dee Dee.
Thank you all. This has been, I think, a fascinating conversation. And as Julia indicated, we could have gone on for much longer, I think, dealing with many of these issues. I hope that for those who've been listening today, it will entice you to go to the olmsted.org website, because I think in so many ways our speakers have really touched upon some of the major vision of Olmsted and the Olmsted firm. The concept that the built environment has immense social, cultural, economic impacts. And to listen to our panelists today, to hear about the complexity of the issues that they're dealing with, the collaborative nature of their efforts, the system-wide focus. These are all things that Olmsted and the Olmsted firm were thinking about back in the 19th century and obviously have immense impact and importance today. So I want to just say thank you to all of you for really stimulating us today to think about stewardship, which is not an exciting word. It's almost as unexciting as maintenance, but as we've heard, it's incredibly important. And we're lucky to have all of you on the front lines dealing with these important challenges in our very important green spaces. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Again, I want to encourage you to sign up for our national conference, September 20 through 22 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we will continue these kinds of conversations. And I want to thank you all again for a terrific session this afternoon. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great summer.